All right, let's talk David Ricardo. If you're digging into international trade, especially for an exam, this name is completely unavoidable. Today, we're going to deconstruct the absolute core of his thinking, Chapter 7 of his work, the part that really laid the foundation for, well, pretty much everything that came after in foreign trade theory.
Okay, so let's get right to it. What's the real point of foreign trade? I mean, is it just about making a country richer? It sounds like such a simple question, right? But Ricardo's answer, from way back over 200 years ago, was a total game changer. He really forces us to think past the easy answers. So here's how we're going to tackle this. We're going to walk through his logic piece by piece. We'll start with his most basic ideas and build all the way up to his famous theory of comparative advantage. Trust me, following this path is the best way to really get what he was saying.
All right, first things first. We have to wrap our heads around this one core idea that Ricardo starts with. He makes this really sharp distinction between a country getting more stuff and a country creating more value. And I know that might sound like we're just playing with words, but for Ricardo, this little distinction is everything. It's the key that unlocks his entire argument.
So take a look here. On one side, you've got more commodities, right? Ricardo's point is that, yeah, trade absolutely fills our country with more things, more variety, what he called a greater sum of enjoyments. It's great for consumers. But, and this is the big but, the total value in the country doesn't just magically go up. And you might ask, why not? Well, for Ricardo, value is all about the labor it took to produce the stuff you exported to get those foreign goods. So you can end up with a whole lot more stuff to use and enjoy, but the fundamental value, which he measures in labor, hasn't changed. More stuff, same value. It's a critical idea.
And here's Ricardo saying it himself. He's super clear. Trade doesn't just instantly create more value out of thin air. What it does do, and this is powerful, is it increases the mass of commodities, all the things we get to use and enjoy. Okay, so once you get that goods versus value thing, it leads right into his next big idea. And this is where he takes on a really common myth about how profits work. So imagine this. Some merchant finds a brand new, crazy profitable trade route. What happens next?
Now, this is where Ricardo really steps away from a lot of other thinkers at the time. Even huge names like Adam Smith. See, the common belief was, hey, find a super profitable trade, and that'll lift the profit rate for the whole country. But Ricardo just wasn't buying it. He basically said, whoa, not so fast.
He had this amazing analogy. He said capital, at least inside a country, is kind of like water. It always finds its own level. So think about it. If importing wine is making a 40% profit, but making shoes only gets you 10%, where's the money going to go? Exactly. Investors are going to pull their capital out of shoes and dump it all into the wine trade. But what happens then? Suddenly, there's a flood of imported wine. The supply goes way up and the price comes crashing down. And just like that, those amazing 40% profits get competed away until they're right back at the normal average level.
So this naturally leads to a really important question. And the answer to this one is at the absolute heart of Ricardo's whole theory.
Right. If just opening up a new, super profitable market doesn't actually raise the overall profit rate for a country, then what does? If the obvious answer isn't it, we've got to dig deeper into how Ricardo saw the economic engine working. And his answer is very specific.
And boom, here it is. For Ricardo, there's only one way for profits across the entire economy to go up. Wages have to go down. And you can't just cut wages for no reason. A permanent drop in wages can only really happen if the price of the basic stuff that workers need to live, food, clothes, goes down.
So you see, foreign trade isn't some magic wand for profits. It's a tool, but it's a very specific tool. For Ricardo, trade only boosts the overall profit rate if it makes the necessaries of the laborer cheaper. Think about it. Importing cheaper luxury goods like silk or fancy wine for the rich, that does nothing to wages, so it doesn't affect general profits. But importing cheaper corn, cheaper food, now that lowers the cost of keeping your workforce fed. That means wages can fall, and that is when profits for everyone can rise.
And this all builds up to the main event. This is the big one, the idea that is literally the foundation of modern international trade theory. It's the whole reason you're probably studying this chapter for your exam.
Okay, let's just look at the raw numbers in his famous example. Now, when you first glance at this, you might think, well, this is a no-brainer. Look at Portugal. They can make both cloth and wine using less labor than England. It only takes them 90 guys to make cloth, where it takes England 100. And for wine, it's even more dramatic, 80 guys in Portugal versus 120 in England.
So Portugal has what we call an absolute advantage in everything. They're just flat out more efficient. But, and here's the genius of Ricardo, he asks a different question. He asks, what is each country comparatively best at? Portugal's advantage in wine, needing 80 men instead of 120, that's a huge advantage. It's much bigger than their advantage in cloth, which is only 90 versus 100. So Portugal has a comparative advantage in wine. And what about England? Well, they're worse at both, but they are less bad at making cloth. And that right there is the crucial insight. It's not about who's best at everything. It's about what you give up the least to make.
And the result of this thinking is just profound. It means it makes sense for both of them to trade. England should forget about making wine and put all its workers into making cloth. Portugal, even though they could make cloth more efficiently, should put all its effort into making wine, where their advantage is massive. Then they trade. England sells cloth to Portugal, Portugal sells wine to England. And the craziest part? Both countries end up with more cloth and more wine than they could have possibly had if they just tried to be self-sufficient.
Okay, but wait, this brings up a pretty logical question, right? If Portugal is just better and more profitable at making everything, why doesn't all the capital, all the factories, all the investors from England just pack up their bags and move to Portugal?
Ricardo totally saw this question coming, and his answer hinges on one crucial real-world observation. He says the reason comparative advantage works between countries is because capital doesn't move as easily across borders as it does within a country.
Here's what he said, and it's so human. He basically argues that capital is sticky. People are just naturally reluctant to pack up and move their entire business to another country. There's the fancied or real insecurity of it all, different laws, different connections, plus, most people just don't want to leave their home, so they'll often accept a lower profit to invest in their own country. And it's this stickiness of capital that keeps all the industry from just rushing to the single most efficient place on Earth. Okay, so let's bring this all home. Let's tie it all together. Why are we still talking about these ideas from 200 years ago? Why does Ricardo still matter so much?
So, here are the big takeaways. First, trade gives us more stuff to enjoy, not necessarily more value. Second, those super high profits you see in a new trade, they don't last. Competition levels them out. Third, the only way to raise profits across the board is to lower the cost of what labor needs to live. And the big one, nations win by specializing in their comparative advantage, not their absolute one. And finally, this whole beautiful system depends on the idea that capital doesn't just zip around the globe freely, it's sticky. These principles totally change the game, arguing that free trade could be a win-win for everyone.
And that leaves us with one final, really big question to chew on. Ricardo's whole theory was built for a world where capital was sticky, where it stayed home. But what about our world? In the 21st century, with hyper-globalization, is capital still immobile? And if it's not, what does that mean for his theory today? Thinking about that is absolutely crucial for understanding how these powerful ideas apply, or maybe don't, in our modern world.